Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Charlotte Monroe pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the subway window, watching the darkness of the tunnel blur past as she mentally calculated how many hours of sleep she'd managed this week. 4 on Monday, 3 on Tuesday, 5 if she counted the 20-minute nap during her lunch break on Wednesday. Thursday had been a disaster she'd rather forget. And now, Friday morning at 6:45, she was heading toward what might be the biggest mistake of her professional life. All because of a single misplaced click. Beside her, wedged into the corner of the crowded train car, her 7-year-old daughter Emma dozed against her shoulder, her school backpack clutched in her small arms like a life preserver. Charlotte smoothed Emma's honey-colored hair, so much like her own, and felt the familiar ache of guilt that came with being a single mother who could never quite do enough. Emma deserved better than pre-dawn subway rides and rushed breakfasts eaten standing up. She deserved stability, security, a mother who wasn't perpetually exhausted and one missed paycheck away from eviction. The train lurched to a stop at Lexington Avenue, and Charlotte gently shook Emma awake. "Come on, sweetheart. This is our stop." As they climbed the stairs to street level, the crisp November air hit them with enough force to make Emma's teeth chatter. Charlotte wrapped her second-hand coat tighter around her daughter's shoulders, regretting for the 100th time that she couldn't afford the winter jacket Emma really needed. The address on her phone led them to a building that made Charlotte's stomach drop. The Ashford Tower wasn't just a building. It was a monument to wealth that soared 60 stories into the Manhattan skyline, all gleaming glass and polished steel. The doorman wore a uniform that probably cost more than Charlotte's entire wardrobe. This had to be a mistake. The email had been clear. Childcare position. Immediate start. Competitive salary. Flexible hours. Apply online. Charlotte had submitted her application at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, exhausted after a double shift at the diner where she waitressed. She'd been scrolling through job listings on her phone, applying to anything remotely suitable, when Emma had called out from her nightmares. Charlotte had rushed to comfort her daughter, and in her distraction, she must have clicked submit on the wrong application. She'd meant to apply for a daycare assistant position in Brooklyn. Somehow she'd ended up applying to be a private nanny for Adrian Ashford, billionaire real estate developer and CEO of Ashford Enterprises. The error had become apparent only when she'd received the interview confirmation email the next morning, complete with a background check authorization and references request. By then, Charlotte's panic had been overridden by a desperate kind of hope. The salary listed was 3 times what she currently made. 3 times. With that kind of money, she could move Emma out of their cramped studio apartment in a building where the heat barely worked, and the neighbors fought at all hours. She could buy her daughter new clothes, healthy food, maybe even save for her education. So Charlotte had done something reckless. She'd called in sick to the diner, borrowed a professional-looking outfit from her friend Keisha who worked in an office downtown, and researched everything she could find about the Ashford family. What she'd discovered had been both encouraging and terrifying. Adrian Ashford, 34 years old, widowed for the past 3 years, father to an 8-year-old son named Lucas. According to the society pages and business journals Charlotte had devoured during her research, Adrian had withdrawn from public life after his wife Isabel's death in a car accident, focusing entirely on his business empire and his son. There were no scandalous rumors, no tabloid drama, just the image of a man who'd built walls around his grief and rarely let anyone inside. The kicker was the detail buried in a human interest piece from 2 years ago. Lucas Ashford had gone through 17 nannies in the 18 months following his mother's death. 17. Each one had lasted less than 8 weeks before quitting or being dismissed. The article had speculated about behavioral problems, about a child acting out his grief, about a father with impossible standards. Charlotte had read it 3 times. each time convincing herself that her experience raising Emma alone, navigating tantrums and bad dreams and the everyday challenges of single motherhood, had prepared her for this. Now, standing in front of the Ashford Tower with her daughter's cold hand in hers, Charlotte felt the full weight of her presumption. She had no formal childcare training, no impressive resume, no business being here at all. The doorman was already looking at them with barely concealed skepticism, and Charlotte realized they must make quite a picture. Her borrowed blazer with its slightly too long sleeves, Emma's shoes held together with superglue, both of them carrying the unmistakable air of people who didn't belong in a place like this. "Can I help you?" The doorman's tone suggested he doubted it very much. Charlotte lifted her chin, channeling a confidence she didn't feel. "I have an interview at 7 o'clock. Charlotte Monroe, here to see Mr. Ashford." The doorman consulted his tablet, his eyebrows rising slightly. He gestured toward the lobby. 60th floor, penthouse level. Security will direct you." The elevator that carried them upward was larger than Charlotte's bedroom and lined with mirrors that reflected her anxiety back at her from every angle. Emma pressed against her side, unusually quiet. She'd promised Emma they were going on an adventure this morning, that she'd be able to wait in a nice office while Mommy had an important meeting. Now Charlotte wondered if bringing her daughter had been a terrible idea, just another in a long line of poor judgments. The elevator doors opened directly into a private foyer that took Charlotte's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Manhattan that seemed to stretch forever. The morning sun painted the city in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment, Charlotte forgot to breathe. This was how the other half lived. This was what money could buy. Miss Monroe, a woman in her 50s, appeared from a side corridor, her elegant gray suit and pearl earrings radiating quiet authority. "I'm Margaret Chen, household manager for the Ashford residence. You're precisely on time. I appreciate punctuality." Charlotte shook her offered hand, trying not to grip too tightly. "Thank you for seeing me. This is my daughter, Emma. I apologize for bringing her. My regular childcare situation fell through this morning." Margaret's expression softened slightly as she looked at Emma. "That's quite all right. In fact, it may prove illuminating. Please follow me." They walked through rooms that seemed designed to intimidate. A living area with furniture that looked like modern art, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library with leather-bound books lining walls that stretched 2 stories high. Charlotte tried not to gawk, tried to project the professional competence of someone who belonged in spaces like this. Emma, to her credit, stayed close and quiet, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mr. Ashford is running a few minutes behind," Margaret explained as she led them to a sunlit sitting room. "He had an early conference call with the London office. I'll conduct the preliminary interview if you don't mind." Of course, Charlotte settled on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than her car, the one that had finally died last month, leaving her dependent on public transportation. Margaret sat across from her, opening a leather portfolio. "I've reviewed your application, Miss Monroe. Your work history is primarily in food service, with no formal childcare experience listed." Charlotte's heart sank. Here it came. The polite dismissal. "The thank you for your time. Yet you applied for a position requiring extensive experience with children," Margaret continued. "What made you think you were qualified for this role?" Charlotte could have lied, could have embellished her background, invented credentials. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "I made a mistake. I was applying for multiple positions that night, and I clicked on the wrong job listing. By the time I realized the error, I'd already been invited to interview." She met Margaret's gaze steadily. "I almost didn't come. I knew I wasn't what you were looking for. But then I thought about my daughter, about the kind of life I'm trying to build for her, and I decided to show up anyway. The worst you could do was say no, and I'm used to hearing that." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Charlotte thought she detected a flicker of interest in the older woman's eyes. And what exactly are you offering Mr. Ashford if you have no professional experience? Honesty, Charlotte said simply. Understanding. I know what it's like to lose someone you love and try to hold yourself together for a child who's watching your every move. Learning how to grieve from your example. Emma's father left when she was 2. He didn't die, but he disappeared just as completely. I've spent the last 5 years figuring out how to be enough parent for one child. Maybe that experience means something. The silence that followed felt loaded with assessment. Margaret's gaze moved to Emma, who had spotted a chess set on a nearby table and was examining the pieces with careful reverence. "Does your daughter play?" Margaret asked. Charlotte shook her head. "We can't afford games like that. But she loves puzzles, patterns, anything that lets her figure out how things work." Margaret stood, moving to the chess set. "Emma, would you like to learn?" Emma looked to Charlotte for permission, and at her mother's nod approached the table with cautious excitement. As Margaret began explaining the basics of the game, Charlotte watched her daughter's face light with concentration. This was what she wanted for Emma. This exposure to beauty and learning, to possibilities beyond their cramped apartment and second-hand everything. "You're very good with children," Charlotte observed as Margaret patiently corrected Emma's grip on a bishop. "I raised 4 sons," Margaret replied without looking up from the board. "All grown now with children of their own. That's part of why I understood when Mr. Ashford needed help with Lucas. Running a household is one thing. Helping a grieving child is another entirely." "Is he?" Charlotte ventured. "Grieving still, I mean. It's been 3 years. Margaret's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Grief doesn't operate on a schedule, Miss Monroe. Especially when you're 8 years old and you watched your mother's car drive away for the last time. Knowing those were the last words you'd ever say to her." Before Charlotte could respond, a door opened somewhere in the apartment, and a young voice rang out. "Margaret, I'm not going. You can't make me." A boy appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, and Charlotte's first thought was that Lucas Ashford looked exactly like the photos she'd seen online. Dark hair falling across his forehead, his father's striking blue eyes in a face, still holding on to the softness of childhood. He wore an expensive school uniform with the tie loose and the shirt half untucked, and his expression was a perfect storm of misery and defiance. "Lucas," Margaret said with gentle firmness. "We've discussed this. You have school." "I don't care," Lucas shot back. "I'm not going. And you can't make me. And if Dad tries to make me, I'll just leave. I've done it before." Charlotte felt Emma shrink against her side, intimidated by the angry boy. She started to stand, ready to remove her daughter from what was clearly becoming a difficult situation. But Margaret held up a subtle hand. "Lucas," she said. "We have a guest. This is Miss Monroe and her daughter, Emma. They're here for an interview." Lucas's furious gaze swung to Charlotte, and she saw the exact moment he categorized her. Another nanny. Another stranger his father was trying to insert into his life to replace the irreplaceable. His expression hardened further. "I don't want a new nanny," he said flatly. "The last one was fine until she left like all the others. Just tell my dad to stop wasting everyone's time." Then he turned and stalked out of the room, leaving a wake of tension behind him. Margaret sighed. "I apologize, Miss Monroe. As you can see, Lucas is going through a difficult phase." "A difficult phase," Charlotte repeated carefully. "Or a difficult grief?" Margaret's surprised look suggested not many people made that distinction. "Both, perhaps." Before either could say more, another door opened, and a man's voice called out Lucas. "We had an agreement. You promised you'd try." If the man in the photographs had been attractive, the man who strode into the sitting room was devastating. Adrian Ashford stood at least 6'3", with dark hair shot through with premature silver at the temples and those same striking blue eyes his son had inherited. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit with the tie loosened, and he moved with the kind of unconscious confidence that came from always being the most powerful person in any room. He stopped short when he saw Charlotte and Emma, and for just a second, something like exhaustion flickered across his features before the professional mask slammed back into place. "Ms. Monroe," he said, and even his voice was unfairly attractive, deep and slightly rough, like he hadn't slept enough. "I apologize. You've caught us at a difficult moment." Charlotte stood, smoothing her borrowed blazer. "I understand if you'd prefer to reschedule." "No," Adrian interrupted, then seemed to catch himself. His expression softened fractionally. "No, I appreciate you coming. Margaret speaks highly of your interview so far, which is rare." He glanced at Margaret, who gave him a subtle nod. "Please, let's talk in my study." "Emma," Charlotte began, but Margaret was already moving toward her daughter. "Emma and I will continue our chess lesson, if that's acceptable." Emma looked uncertain, but Charlotte squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'll be right down the hall, sweetheart. You're safe here." As Charlotte followed Adrian through the penthouse, she couldn't help but notice the details that spoke of a life interrupted. Family photos clustered on tables, but they all seemed to stop 3 years ago. A woman's reading glasses sitting on a bookshelf as if she'd just set them down. Small shrines to a ghost that no one had the heart to dismantle. Adrian's study was all dark wood and leather, with those same floor-to-ceiling windows that made Manhattan look like a toy city spread out for his amusement. He gestured for Charlotte to sit, then moved to stand by the windows rather than taking his own chair behind the massive desk. "I'll be direct, Miss Monroe," he said without preamble. "I've read your application and, frankly, you're not qualified for this position. You have no formal training, no references in childcare, and you applied by mistake." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "So why are you here?" "Because I need the job," Charlotte said simply. "And because your son needs someone who understands what he's going through." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "You think you understand my son?" "I think I understand loss," Charlotte countered. "I think I understand what it's like to be a child watching the only parent you have left try to hold everything together while falling apart inside. And I think I understand what it's like to be that parent, knowing you're failing, but not knowing how to do better." The silence stretched between them, heavy with challenge. Finally, Adrian moved to his desk, sinking into the leather chair with obvious weariness. 17 nannies. Ms. Monroe. Some were older women with decades of experience. Some were young and energetic with expensive degrees in child psychology. Some were strict disciplinarians. Some were gentle nurturers. All of them failed. Or, I failed them. I don't even know anymore. He looked at her directly, and Charlotte saw the exhaustion beneath the polished exterior. "What makes you think you'd be any different?" "Honestly, I don't know if I would be," Charlotte admitted. "But I know that sometimes the most important qualification isn't on a resume. Sometimes it's just showing up and being willing to try, even when you're scared you'll fail." Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Charlotte felt the weight of his assessment, the way his gaze seemed to catalog every detail: her borrowed blazer, her worn shoes, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. She lifted her chin, refusing to apologize for being exactly who she was. "Tell me about your daughter," Adrian said finally. "How old is she?" 7. Charlotte's voice softened instinctively. "Emma. She's in 2nd grade at PS 147 in Brooklyn. She loves puzzles and drawing, and she's teaching herself to read music from library books because we can't afford lessons. She's sweet and quiet and braver than I ever was at her age. And her father." Adrian's tone was carefully neutral. "Gone since she was 2. He sends a card on her birthday sometimes, usually late, and that's the extent of his involvement." Charlotte met Adrian's gaze steadily. "I don't need his help. We manage." "Just barely," Adrian observed, and it wasn't cruel, just accurate. Charlotte stiffened. "We manage," she repeated. Adrian leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Here's my dilemma. Miss Monroe, every instinct tells me you're wrong for this position. You're inexperienced, financially desperate, and you came here under false pretenses. All excellent reasons to end this interview right now. Charlotte braced herself for the dismissal, but Adrian continued, and something in his expression shifted. Margaret, whose judgment I trust implicitly, seems to think there's something here worth considering, and Lucas's reaction to you was interesting. Interesting? Charlotte echoed. He was openly hostile. He spoke to you, Adrian said simply. He looked at you. The last 3 candidates, he pretended they didn't exist. Walked past them like they were furniture. At least anger is engagement. Charlotte wasn't sure what to make of that logic. Mr. Ashford, I appreciate your time, but I'm starting to think I'm not what your family needs. What do you think my family needs? The question caught her off guard. I think, Charlotte began carefully, that your son needs to stop being treated like a problem to be solved. Every nanny you've hired has probably come in with strategies and techniques and theories about childhood development. But Lucas doesn't need another expert. He needs someone who'll meet him where he is, even if that place is angry and hurt and impossible. And do you think you can do that? Adrian's skepticism was evident. I think I can try, Charlotte said, because I recognize that anger. I've seen it in my own mirror often enough. Before Adrian could respond, a knock came at the door, and Margaret appeared, her expression troubled. Mr. Ashford, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Lucas has locked himself in his room and is refusing to come out. He's saying he won't go to school, won't eat, won't do anything until we all leave him alone. Adrian's jaw tightened with frustration. This is becoming a pattern. He stood abruptly. Excuse me, Miss Monroe. I need to deal with this. Charlotte watched him stride from the room, all commanding authority, and she thought about an 8-year-old boy behind a locked door, trying to control the one thing he could. His own space, his own refusal to cooperate with a world that had already taken too much from him. Without quite deciding to do it, Charlotte followed. She found Adrian standing outside a bedroom door, his hand pressed flat against the wood as if he could reach through it to his son. Lucas, please, he was saying, his voice stripped of its usual command. We've talked about this. You have to go to school. It's the law. I don't care about the law, came Lucas's muffled response. Charlotte could hear tears in the boy's voice now, beneath the anger. I don't care about anything. Just leave me alone. Mr. Ashford, Charlotte said quietly. May I try? Adrian turned, surprise and frustration warring on his face. Miss Monroe, I don't think. Please, Charlotte interrupted. What's the worst that could happen? He tells me to go away. You're already at that point. For a moment, she thought Adrian would refuse. Then he stepped aside with a gesture that was part permission, part defeat. Charlotte moved to the door, not knocking, just settling herself on the floor with her back against the wall beside it, like she was planning to stay a while. Lucas. She called through the door. My name is Charlotte. I'm not here to make you do anything. I just wanted to tell you a story, if you're interested. Silence from inside the room. Charlotte continued anyway. When my daughter Emma was 5, she decided she hated bedtime. Every single night became a battle. She'd cry. She'd negotiate. She'd sneak out of bed 20 times. I tried everything. Sticker charts, rewards, threats, you name it. Nothing worked. What did you do? Lucas's voice was suspicious but curious. I stopped fighting, Charlotte said. One night I just sat down outside her bedroom door, kind of like I'm sitting now, and I told her she could stay up as long as she wanted. But I was going to sit there, and if she wanted to talk or tell me about her day, or just know I was close by, I'd be there. Did it work? Lucas asked after a pause. Not the first night, Charlotte admitted, or the second. But by the third night she opened the door and sat down next to me. And we talked about why bedtime felt so scary. Turns out, she was afraid I wouldn't be there when she woke up. That I'd disappear like her dad did. The silence from inside the room felt different now. Charlotte pressed on. The thing about anger, Lucas, is that it's usually protecting something. Usually fear or hurt, or both. And sometimes the people who love us most don't know how to reach past the anger to find what's underneath. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they're scared too. Why are you telling me this? Lucas's voice was closer to the door now. Because I think you're angry, and I think you have every right to be. And I think your dad is trying his best, but he doesn't know how to fix what's broken. Because some things can't be fixed. They can only be survived. The door opened a crack, and Charlotte found herself looking at Lucas's tear-stained face. His defiance had crumbled into exhaustion. You're not like the other nannies, he said. No, Charlotte agreed. I'm probably worse, honestly. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Lucas opened the door wider, studying her with those blue eyes that were too old for his face. Then why are you here? Because I need the job. And because I think maybe you need someone who doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Charlotte glanced up at Adrian, who was watching the exchange with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your dad is trying to help you. He's just doing it the way he knows how. Which is hiring strangers and expecting me to let them replace Mom, Lucas said bitterly. Nobody can replace your mom, Charlotte said gently. Nobody's trying to. But you can't live in this room forever, and your dad can't stop running his company to sit outside your door. And something has to change, so maybe we figure out a different way forward. One where you get to be angry when you need to be, and scared when you can't help it, and your dad gets to stop feeling like he's failing at the most important job he's ever had. Lucas looked at his father. Really looked at him for what Charlotte suspected was the first time in a while. Dad, Lucas said finally. I'm sorry. I miss her. I know. Adrian's voice cracked. I know, Lucas. I miss her too. In that moment, watching father and son navigate their shared grief, Charlotte felt like an intruder. She started to stand, to give them privacy, but Adrian's hand on her shoulder stopped her. Don't go, he said quietly. Please. So Charlotte stayed, bearing witness as Adrian knelt to embrace his son, as Lucas clung to his father and cried the way he probably hadn't let himself cry in far too long. She stayed, as Margaret appeared with tissues and quiet understanding. She stayed as Emma emerged from the sitting room, drawn by some intuition, and slipped her small hand into Charlotte's, grounding her. When Lucas finally pulled away from his father, wiping at his eyes with embarrassment, he noticed Emma for the first time. Who's that? He asked. This is my daughter, Emma, Charlotte introduced. Emma. This is Lucas. Emma, who had inherited her mother's empathy along with her coloring, stepped forward and offered Lucas her hand with grave formality. Nice to meet you, Lucas. You have a really cool apartment. Lucas managed a watery smile. Thanks. You want to see my room? It's even cooler than the apartment. As the two children disappeared into Lucas's domain, their voices drifting back about video games and book collections, Adrian turned to Charlotte with an expression of wonder. How did you do that? I've been trying to reach him for months. Charlotte shrugged. I didn't do anything. I just stopped trying to fix him and started trying to hear him. Adrian held her gaze, and something shifted in the air between them. Something Charlotte wasn't sure she was ready to name. Miss Monroe, he said formally, though his eyes remained warm. I'd like to offer you the position of Lucas's nanny. 6-month trial period. Salary as listed in the posting, health insurance included. You'd start Monday if that's acceptable. Charlotte's heart leapt even as her mind raced with logistics. Mr. Ashford, I need to be honest. I have no idea if I can do this job well. I know nothing about your world, your expectations, or how to help your son long term. I just know I'm willing to try. That's all I'm asking, Adrian said. Someone willing to try. Someone willing to see Lucas as a person rather than a problem. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Charlotte looked at his offered hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. Her life. Emma's life. The careful balance she'd maintained for the past 5 years. This job would bring them into a world they didn't understand. Expose them to a kind of wealth and privilege that could be both intoxicating and dangerous. But it would also mean security, a steady paycheck, health insurance, the chance to give Emma the stability she deserved. Charlotte took Adrian's hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. We have an agreement, as she shook hands with Adrian Ashford, sealing a deal that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Charlotte had no idea that walking into his world would unravel secrets, challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, and force her to confront feelings she'd convinced herself she'd never have the luxury of experiencing again. This was only the beginning. Charlotte's first official day as Lucas Ashford's nanny began at 6:30 on a Monday morning in late November, with Emma's alarm clock blaring from the nightstand they shared in their tiny Brooklyn apartment. Charlotte had been awake for an hour already, mentally rehearsing the subway route that would get them to the Upper East Side by 7:45, calculating how long it would take to drop Emma at school, and then double back to the Ashford Tower. The logistics of her new life felt like an impossible puzzle, but she'd promised Adrian she could manage it. In the week since accepting the position, Charlotte had signed more paperwork than she'd thought existed. Background checks, tax documents, confidentiality agreements that made it clear she was entering a world where discretion was currency. Margaret had walked her through the household routines with patient thoroughness. Lucas's schedule, his dietary preferences, which he had many and most of them contradictory. The private school's drop-off procedures, the approved activities, the forbidden topics. Charlotte's head had spun with information, but she'd taken careful notes, determined not to fail before she'd even begun. Now, watching Emma stumble sleepily toward the bathroom, Charlotte felt the full weight of the risk she'd taken. She'd quit her job at the diner, burning a bridge she couldn't rebuild if this arrangement fell apart. She'd committed to a role she wasn't qualified for, working for a man whose intensity both intimidated and intrigued her, and she'd brought Emma into it all, making her daughter's well-being dependent on Charlotte's ability to navigate a world they'd only ever glimpsed from the outside. "Mom," Emma called from the bathroom, her voice thick with sleep. "Can I wear my blue dress today? The one with the buttons?" Charlotte joined her, helping with toothbrush and hairbrush, the familiar routine grounding her anxiety. "Sure, sweetheart. Special occasion? You're starting your fancy new job," Emma said with the uncomplicated pride of a 7-year-old who didn't yet understand the class implications of what her mother had undertaken. "I want to look fancy too." Charlotte's heart squeezed. Emma's blue dress was from a thrift store, the buttons mismatched where Charlotte had replaced the missing originals, and fancy was a generous description. But Emma loved it, and Charlotte had never been able to afford better. That's changing, she reminded herself. With this job's salary, she'd be able to buy Emma new clothes, proper winter coat, maybe even those music lessons she dreamed about. She just had to survive long enough to earn it. They made the subway with minutes to spare, squeezing into the crowded car with the crush of Monday morning commuters. Emma pressed against Charlotte's side, her backpack clutched tight, watching the diverse faces around them with quiet curiosity. Charlotte used the ride to review Margaret's notes on her phone, memorizing the details that would make her seem competent. Lucas hated eggs but loved oatmeal with honey. He had piano lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He'd been excused from gym class since his mother's death due to anxiety attacks, a detail that had broken Charlotte's heart when she'd read it. They emerged from the subway at 77th Street, and the contrast between this neighborhood and their own hit Charlotte with fresh force. Here, the brownstones gleamed with recent renovation. The people hurrying past wore clothes that cost more than Charlotte's monthly rent used to be. Even the air seemed cleaner somehow. Or maybe that was just her imagination. Emma's school was 40 blocks south, requiring another train ride that would make Charlotte late if she didn't hustle. She debated the cost of a taxi, then reminded herself that she hadn't received her first paycheck yet. The salary was generous, but it wouldn't help if she couldn't manage the logistics of getting to work on time. Miss Monroe. Margaret's voice came from behind them, and Charlotte turned to find the household manager approaching with brisk efficiency. She'd texted Charlotte yesterday with a simple message. "I'll meet you at the subway tomorrow morning," but Charlotte hadn't understood why until now. "I've arranged for a car service," Margaret explained, gesturing to a sleek black town car idling at the curb. "It'll take Emma to school and pick her up this afternoon, bringing her to the penthouse. Mr. Ashford thought it would simplify your mornings." Charlotte stared at the car, then at Margaret, trying to process this unexpected development. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's practical," Margaret corrected. "You can't do your job effectively if you're spending 3 hours a day on public transportation. Mr. Ashford values efficiency. Besides, Emma will have access to the car service whenever needed. Consider it part of your compensation package." Charlotte wanted to argue, to maintain some independence, but Emma was already eyeing the car with wonder. She'd never ridden in anything that clean, that new, that deliberately luxurious. "Okay," Charlotte conceded. "Thank you, Margaret." As Charlotte buckled Emma into the back seat, her daughter whispered, "Mom, is this really happening? Are we really doing this?" "We're really doing this," Charlotte confirmed, kissing her forehead. "Be good at school, sweetheart. I'll see you this afternoon." The car pulled away with Emma waving from the window, and Charlotte felt the familiar guilt of separation intensified by the strangeness of the circumstances. Then Margaret was guiding her toward the Ashford Tower. All business. Lucas is already awake, which is unusual. Normally, getting him out of bed is a negotiation. Today he was dressed and asking for you by 7 o'clock. That's good, right? Charlotte ventured. Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "It's different. Just remember, Miss Monroe, you made a connection with Lucas during a crisis. Maintaining that connection during normal routines is another matter entirely. Don't be discouraged if today is difficult." The warning proved prescient. Charlotte found Lucas in the penthouse kitchen, picking at a bowl of oatmeal while scrolling through his phone with the focused intensity of someone avoiding eye contact. He was dressed in his school uniform, the same expensive blazer and pressed pants that probably cost more than Charlotte's entire wardrobe. But his dark hair stuck up in several directions, and he'd buttoned his shirt wrong. "Hey, Lucas," Charlotte greeted, keeping her tone casual. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Fine," Lucas mumbled without looking up. "You ready for school?" "No, but apparently I have to go anyway." His tone carried an edge that hadn't been there during their breakthrough moment outside his locked bedroom door. Charlotte recognized the testing energy. The way traumatized kids often pushed hardest against the people they'd let close. She'd seen it in Emma, the way her daughter would sometimes lash out at Charlotte precisely because she was safe. Because she wouldn't leave. "Fair enough," Charlotte said, pouring herself coffee from the elaborate machine that probably required a manual she should have read. "School's pretty much universally terrible at your age." "I'm not your age," Lucas shot back, "and you don't have to pretend to relate to me. I'm just another job for you." That stung more than Charlotte wanted to admit, but she refused to take the bait. "You're right on both counts," she agreed. "But that doesn't mean I don't care what happens to you." Lucas finally looked at her, his blue eyes assessing. "The 17 nannies before you probably said the same thing." "Probably," Charlotte acknowledged. "But they're not here. And I am. So how about we make a deal? You give me an honest chance for 1 month. If I turn out to be as bad as the others, you can ask your dad to fire me, and I'll go quietly. But if I'm doing okay, you stop testing me every 5 seconds and we actually try to make this work." Lucas studied her suspiciously. "What do you get out of the deal?" "A job I desperately need and the chance to not fail in front of a man who makes me nervous," Charlotte said honestly. Plus, my daughter Emma really liked you when you two met. If I get fired, I'll have to explain to her that I messed up, and disappointing my kid is pretty much my worst nightmare." Something shifted in Lucas's expression. "Emma's the girl with the blonde hair? The one who shook my hand like she was meeting the president?" "That's her." Charlotte smiled. "She takes social interactions very seriously." "She was raised right," Lucas said, and Charlotte heard the implicit criticism of other children he'd encountered who presumably hadn't been. Then his expression hardened again. "But my mom was the one who taught me manners, not some random nanny, so don't think you're going to replace her." "I'm not trying to replace anyone, Lucas," Charlotte said gently. "I'm just trying to help your dad figure out how to keep you safe and reasonably happy while he runs his company. That's the job. Nothing more, nothing less." Lucas pushed his oatmeal away, suddenly looking much younger than 8. "What if I don't want to be reasonably happy? What if I just want to be left alone?" "Then I'd say you have every right to feel that way," Charlotte replied, "but being left alone isn't the same as being okay. And I think somewhere under all that anger, you know you're not okay. And you're tired of pretending you are." The silence that followed felt loaded with everything Lucas couldn't or wouldn't say. Finally, he stood, shouldering his expensive backpack with practiced ease. "We're going to be late for school." Margaret's super strict about punctuality. As they rode the elevator down to the waiting car, Lucas maintaining his careful distance, Charlotte wondered if she'd pushed too hard. Been too honest, but children, especially traumatized ones, had a sixth sense for insincerity. If she was going to help Lucas, she had to be genuine, even when it was uncomfortable. The drive to Ashford Academy, the elite private school where Lucas was in 3rd grade, took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Lucas spent the entire ride in silence, staring out the window with studied indifference. Charlotte didn't try to force conversation, just observed the neighborhood changing around them. Brownstones giving way to townhouses, giving way to a gated campus that looked more like a small university than an elementary school. "You have to walk me to the classroom," Lucas informed her as they pulled up. "It's a security thing." All the nannies do it. Inside, Ashford Academy was everything Charlotte had expected, and somehow more. Marble floors, artwork that was probably original, students in crisp uniforms moving through hallways with the quiet confidence of children who'd never doubted their place in the world. Other nannies and parents clustered near the classroom doors. A mix of uniformed caregivers and designer-clad mothers who looked like they'd stepped from magazine pages. Charlotte felt their eyes on her as she walked Lucas to his classroom, felt their assessment of her off-the-rack clothes and sensible shoes. She lifted her chin, refusing to apologize for being exactly who she was. Miss Monroe, a teacher, intercepted them before they reached the door. A young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm Jessica Hartley, Lucas's teacher. It's nice to finally meet you. Lucas has mentioned you several times this morning." "She has?" Charlotte glanced at Lucas, who was suddenly fascinated by his shoes. Lucas's ears turned pink. "I just said you seemed okay. For a nanny." Miss Hartley smiled. That's high praise from Lucas. He's usually much more reticent about new caregivers. "Miss Monroe, would you have time this afternoon to meet briefly? I'd like to discuss Lucas's academic progress and some concerns I have." "Of course," Charlotte agreed, though her stomach tightened with apprehension. "What time works for you? After dismissal? Around 3:15? "Perfect. I'll be here." As Lucas headed into the classroom, he paused, looking back at Charlotte with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're really coming back?" he asked quietly. "I'm really coming back," Charlotte confirmed. "I promise." The uncertainty in Lucas's face nearly broke her heart. How many promises had been made to this child, and then broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control? His mother had probably promised to come home that last day. Had probably kissed him goodbye with every intention of seeing him that evening. Now every promise, every assurance of return, carried the weight of that betrayal. "I'll be here at 3 o'clock, Charlotte repeated, making her voice firm. "You can count on it." Lucas nodded and disappeared into the classroom, and Charlotte stood in the hallway feeling the enormity of the responsibility she'd undertaken. This wasn't just about managing schedules and making lunches. This was about rebuilding trust for a child who'd learned too young that the world was unreliable, that love was no guarantee against loss. The drive back to the Ashford Tower gave Charlotte time to review Margaret's detailed schedule for the day. She'd be organizing Lucas's room, doing his laundry with very specific instructions about water temperature and detergent brands, preparing his afternoon snack, and reviewing homework assignments from the school portal. It was domestic work, familiar in many ways, but elevated to an art form by the Ashford family's exacting standards. She'd just finished sorting Lucas's laundry, amazed that an 8-year-old had more clothes than she'd owned in her entire life, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Margaret says you survived the morning drop-off." That's promising. Most don't make it past day 3. Adrian. Charlotte stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The Adrian Ashford she'd met at the interview had been formally professional, even during their surprisingly personal conversation. This Adrian, texting her with wry humor, felt like someone else entirely. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on something neutral. "Lucas is testing boundaries, but that's to be expected. We have a 1-month trial arrangement." His response came quickly. "A trial arrangement? That sounds ominous. For him or for you?" "Both," Charlotte admitted. "He gets to decide if I'm worth keeping, and I get to decide if I can handle this job without having a nervous breakdown." "Fair terms," Adrian replied. For what it's worth, Lucas never mentioned previous nannies at breakfast. The fact that he's talking about you at all is significant. The conversation paused, and Charlotte returned to her organizing, trying not to overthink the interaction. But then another message appeared. "I'm working from home this afternoon. Conference calls in my study. If you need anything, I'm available. But don't feel obligated to report in. Margaret has probably already established surveillance protocols." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "Does Margaret actually report my every move to you?" "Only the interesting ones," Adrian sent back. "So far today, I've learned that you can operate the coffee machine without instructions. That puts you ahead of the last 4 nannies." "What happened to the last 4? Charlotte asked before she could think better of it. "The first one quit after Lucas put salt in her coffee. The second lasted 3 weeks before deciding our household was too dysfunctional. The third made it 6 weeks before accepting a better offer. And the fourth," Adrian's text paused, then continued. "The fourth reminded Lucas too much of his mother. She was kind and patient, and Lucas couldn't handle it. That's why he pushed her away." Charlotte's heart ached reading those words. "How do you know I won't remind him of his mother?" "Because you're nothing like Isabel," Adrian replied. "And I mean that as a compliment to both of you. You're real in a way my wife could never afford to be. And Lucas needs real right now. He needs someone who won't shatter if he pushes too hard." The unexpected insight into Adrian's marriage lingered with Charlotte as she finished her tasks. She'd assumed, as most people probably did, that Isabel Ashford's life had been perfect, beautiful, wealthy, married to a successful man, living in a penthouse most people couldn't even imagine. But Adrian's comments suggested complications beneath the surface, vulnerabilities that wealth and privilege hadn't protected. Her afternoon was consumed with the mundane details of domestic work, but elevated by the surroundings. She prepared Lucas's snack in a kitchen that belonged in a magazine spread. She organized his homework area in a room with custom built-in bookshelves. Every task reminded her that she was living a borrowed life, inhabiting spaces she'd never belonged to. Not really. At 2:30, she headed back to Ashford Academy, arriving early enough to observe the pickup routine. The same cluster of nannies and parents, the same unspoken hierarchies and social calculations. Charlotte hung back, not trying to insert herself into conversations she hadn't been invited to join. "Miss Monroe?" A woman approached her, immaculately dressed in Lululemon and diamonds, her smile friendly but assessing. "I'm Vanessa Caldwell, mother of Jasper and Lucas's class. I wanted to introduce myself." Charlotte shook her offered hand. "Nice to meet you." Vanessa's smile widened. "You're the new nanny. The 18th attempt, if I'm counting correctly. You're brave." "Or desperate," Charlotte said lightly, refusing to take offense. "Probably both." Vanessa laughed. "Well, at least you're honest. Most of the help around here pretends they're doing this out of love for the children rather than needing the paycheck." The casual classism stung, but Charlotte kept her expression neutral. "I do need the paycheck, but that doesn't mean I don't care about Lucas." "We'll see," Vanessa said, her tone suggesting she'd watched this movie before and knew how it ended. "Lucas is a challenging child, sweet when he wants to be, but damaged in ways that make him nearly impossible to reach." Damaged? Charlotte's protective instincts flared. "He's grieving." "That's not the same as damaged." Vanessa's expression cooled slightly. "Semantics. Either way, he's been through more nannies than any child in this school's history. Don't take it personally when you become number 19. Before Charlotte could respond, the classroom doors opened, and students streamed out. Lucas appeared, spotted Charlotte, and his entire demeanor shifted. He didn't smile, exactly, but something in his rigid posture relaxed. She'd kept her promise. She'd come back. "Ready to go?" Charlotte asked as he reached her. Lucas nodded, then glanced at Vanessa Caldwell. "Hi, Mrs. Caldwell." "Hello, Lucas." Vanessa's voice warmed considerably. "How was your day?" "Fine," Lucas said shortly, then looked at Charlotte. "Can we leave now?" As they walked toward the waiting car, Charlotte heard Vanessa murmur something to another mother, and though she couldn't make out the words, the tone was clear. Speculation. Judgment. The certainty that Charlotte would fail like all the others. "She's not going to last 2 weeks, one of the mothers said, just loud enough to carry. "Look at her. She's completely out of her depth." Charlotte kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction, but Lucas had heard. He looked up at her with those 2 old eyes. "They always say that about the new nannies." "I know," Charlotte replied calmly. "Miss Monroe?" Miss Hartley appeared before they could leave. "Do you have a few minutes for that meeting?" Of course, Charlotte gestured for Lucas to wait nearby, then followed the teacher to a quiet corner. Miss Hartley's expression was concerned. "I wanted to discuss Lucas's academic performance. His work has been declining over the past few months, particularly in reading comprehension and creative writing." "Is he struggling with the material?" Charlotte asked. "Quite the opposite," Miss Hartley said. "Lucas is exceptionally bright. But he's stopped engaging with assignments that require emotional investment. If a writing prompt asks him to describe a happy memory or create a character with a family, he simply refuses to complete it. He'll take the 0 rather than engage." Charlotte understood immediately. He's protecting himself. "Exactly," Miss Hartley confirmed. "I've tried various approaches, but nothing breaks through. I'm hoping that with a new caregiver, someone he seems to trust more than previous ones, we might see some progress." "What do you need from me?" Charlotte asked. "Encouragement without pressure," Miss Hartley suggested. "Maybe try reading with him at home, discussing stories in casual ways that don't feel like assignments." "Lucas is a deeply creative child, Miss Monroe. I've seen glimpses of it when he lets his guard down. But he's buried that creativity under so many defensive layers that I'm not sure how to reach it anymore." "I'll work with him," Charlotte promised, though she had no idea how to accomplish what this experienced teacher couldn't. When she collected Lucas and headed for the car, he was uncharacteristically quiet. "What did Miss Hartley say?" he asked finally. "That you're smart and creative, but you're protecting yourself," Charlotte answered honestly, "and that she misses seeing your real work." "I don't have real work anymore," Lucas said flatly. "I just do enough to not get held back." "Why?" Charlotte asked gently. Lucas stared out the car window as they pulled into traffic. Because writing about feelings is stupid. Feelings don't change anything. They just hurt. The raw honesty in his voice made Charlotte's throat tight. She wanted to argue, to tell him that feelings mattered, that expression was healing, all the platitudes that caring adults offered grieving children. But Lucas had probably heard all of it before, and empty words hadn't helped. Instead, she said, "You know what? You're right. Feelings do hurt sometimes. And maybe right now, protecting yourself from that hurt is exactly what you need to do." Lucas looked at her with surprise. "You're not going to tell me I have to express myself or whatever?" "Nope," Charlotte said. "You get to decide what you share and when. Nobody else." The tension in Lucas's shoulders eased slightly. "Even my dad wants me to talk about my feelings. He says it'll help." "Maybe it would," Charlotte acknowledged. "Or maybe you're not ready yet. And that's okay too. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive until you are ready." They rode in silence for a while, Lucas processing this unexpected permission to remain closed off, Charlotte hoping she hadn't just undermined every therapeutic approach the Ashford family had tried. When they arrived back at the penthouse, Emma was already there, being entertained by Margaret with another chess lesson. Lucas's face lit with something close to genuine interest when he saw them. "Hey, Emma. Want to see my room? I've got this virtual reality system that's really cool." Emma looked to Charlotte for permission, and at her nod, the two children disappeared together. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's the first time Lucas has invited another child to his room in over a year. "Really?" Charlotte felt a small flicker of hope. Margaret nodded. Usually he tolerates his classmates' company but never seeks it out. Emma must have made quite an impression. "She's good at that," Charlotte said softly. "She sees people for who they really are, not who they're pretending to be." The rest of the afternoon passed in relative calm. Charlotte prepared dinner following Margaret's detailed instructions while keeping an ear on the children's laughter drifting from Lucas's room. It was almost normal, this domestic routine, except for the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan and the artwork on the walls that was probably worth more than Charlotte would earn in a lifetime. At 6 o'clock, Adrian emerged from his study, loosening his tie with obvious weariness. The conference calls had apparently not gone well. He paused when he heard the children's voices, surprise flickering across his face. "Is that Lucas laughing?" Charlotte nodded, stirring pasta sauce. He and Emma have been playing video games for the past hour. They're designing some kind of virtual world together. Adrian moved to the kitchen island, watching Charlotte work with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She was acutely aware of her borrowed appearance of competence, of how easily this illusion could shatter. "How was the first day?" he asked. "Challenging," Charlotte admitted. "Lucas is testing boundaries. His teacher says he's struggling with assignments that require emotional engagement, and the other parents at pickup looked at me like I was there to steal the silver. So, pretty much what I expected." Adrian's smile was tired but genuine. "The fact that you expected it puts you ahead of most. And Lucas invited Emma to his room, which, as Margaret probably told you, is unprecedented. We're calling it a successful first day." Charlotte ladled pasta into bowls, hyper-aware of Adrian's presence in the kitchen. He'd shed his suit jacket and rolled his sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms that were unfairly distracting. She forced her attention back to dinner service, reminding herself that Adrian Ashford was her employer, nothing more. Any attraction she felt was inappropriate and potentially job-threatening. "Would you and Emma like to stay for dinner?" Adrian asked. "It seems wrong to send you home after you've cooked." Charlotte hesitated. "That's generous, but Emma has homework, and we should get back to Brooklyn. It's a long commute." "Actually," Adrian said carefully, "I wanted to discuss that. The commute, I mean." He pulled out his phone, tapping through screens. "Margaret mentioned that you're spending nearly 4 hours a day traveling between Brooklyn and here. That's unsustainable long-term." I can manage, Charlotte said quickly, defensive despite herself. I'm sure you can, Adrian replied. But I'm not sure Emma should have to. She's 7 years old, spending hours on subways and in car services just to accommodate your job. There's a better solution. Which is? Charlotte asked warily. The building has staff apartments on the 40th floor, Adrian explained. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, utilities included. They're normally reserved for live-in staff, but given your circumstances and the fact that Lucas is actually connected with Emma, I'd like to offer you one. Rent-free, obviously, as part of your compensation package. Charlotte stared at him, trying to process the offer. He was suggesting they move into the Ashford Tower, into an apartment she'd never be able to afford on her own, creating a life that was entirely dependent on her continued employment. The risk was staggering. Mr. Ashford, I appreciate the offer, but that's too much. It's practical, Adrian countered, the same argument Margaret had used about the car service. You'd be closer to Lucas, able to respond if there were emergencies. Emma would have a shorter commute to a better school district. We could even arrange a transfer to Ashford Academy if you're interested. They have an excellent scholarship program for employees' children. You're trying to make me dependent on you, Charlotte said bluntly. If this job doesn't work out, Emma and I would have nowhere to go. Fair point, Adrian acknowledged. So let me sweeten the deal. The apartment would be yours for 6 months minimum, regardless of your employment status. If I fire you or you quit, you'd still have housing security while you figure out your next steps. That's a legally binding contract I'm happy to put in writing. Why would you do that? Charlotte asked. Because Lucas is laughing in the next room for the first time in months, Adrian said simply. Because in one day, you've accomplished what 17 other highly qualified professionals couldn't. And because I have the resources to make your life easier, and not using them when I can help, seems wasteful. Charlotte wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, to protect herself and Emma from becoming too comfortable in a world they might have to leave. But the truth was, their current situation was barely sustainable. The studio apartment with broken heat, the 4-hour daily commute, the constant financial stress. This offer could change everything for Emma, could give her stability, better education, safety. And all Charlotte had to do was risk everything if it fell apart. I need to think about it, she said finally. That's fair, Adrian replied. Take a few days. But know that the offer is genuine, and I don't make it lightly. The moment was interrupted by Emma and Lucas emerging from the bedroom, both children flushed with excitement. Dad, Lucas said, the first word he'd spoken to his father all evening. Emma's really good at the world-building game. She made this whole forest with hidden caves and everything. She's creative, Adrian agreed, smiling at Emma. Just like her mother, I suspect. Emma beamed under the praise, and Charlotte felt her defenses crumbling further. This man, this intimidating billionaire CEO, was being genuinely kind to her daughter. Not performatively, not for show, but with real warmth. It was dangerously appealing. Can Emma stay for dinner? Lucas asked. Please? Charlotte saw the hope in both children's faces and knew she couldn't refuse. I guess we're staying, she conceded. But Emma, you'll need to do your homework right after. They ate together at the penthouse's massive dining table, a meal that felt both strangely intimate and awkward. Lucas and Emma chattered about their virtual world, while Charlotte tried not to stare at Adrian, who seemed equally determined to maintain professional distance while sneaking glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. After dinner, while Emma tackled her second-grade math homework with Lucas's surprisingly patient help, Adrian asked Charlotte to join him in his study. She followed nervously, unsure what this private conversation would entail. He gestured for her to sit, then moved to the windows overlooking the city lights. I wanted to explain something, Adrian began, his back to her. About what I said earlier, regarding Isabel. Suggesting you're nothing like her. It came out wrong. I didn't mean it as a criticism of either of you. You don't owe me explanations about your wife, Charlotte said quietly. Actually, I think I do. Adrian turned to face her. You're working in our home, caring for our son, navigating the aftermath of her absence. It's not fair to keep you entirely in the dark about what that means. Charlotte waited, sensing Adrian needed to find his own way through whatever he was trying to say. Isabel was extraordinary, he continued. Beautiful, accomplished, from a family as wealthy as mine. We met at a charity gala when we were both 25, married a year later, had Lucas 2 years after that. On paper, it was perfect. And in reality? In reality, Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. We cared about each other deeply. But I'm not sure we were ever in love, not the way people should be when they get married. It was more like merging compatible companies. We had similar goals, similar backgrounds, and similar ideas about what our life should look like. He moved to his desk, picking up a framed photo Charlotte hadn't noticed before. It showed a stunning woman with dark hair and Lucas's blue eyes, holding a baby Lucas with a smile that looked more posed than spontaneous. She was a wonderful mother, Adrian continued. Patient, devoted, everything Lucas needed. But she struggled with the isolation of it, the way her entire identity became Adrian Ashford's wife, or Lucas Ashford's mother. She'd been an art curator before Lucas was born, had real talent and passion for it. But after marriage, everyone expected her to focus on charity work and social obligations. Her own interests took a back seat. Did she resent that? Charlotte asked gently. I think so, though she rarely said it outright. Adrian set the photo down. The day she died, she was driving to a gallery opening. Her first professional event in years. She'd been excited about it for weeks, talking about getting back to her own work. And then, a drunk driver ran a red light. And everything ended. I'm so sorry, Charlotte said inadequately. Thank you. Adrian's expression was carefully controlled. But Charlotte saw the grief underneath. I tell you this because Lucas knows his mother was leaving when she died. Not leaving us, just leaving the apartment for the evening. But in his child's mind, I think he's conflated the two. She left. And she didn't come back. And now he struggles with anyone leaving, even temporarily. That makes sense, Charlotte said. It explains why he asked if I was really coming back at school drop-off. Exactly. Adrian met her gaze. And it explains why I need someone who won't make promises they can't keep. Someone real who Lucas can trust not to disappear, even when things get difficult. The weight of that responsibility settled over Charlotte like a physical thing. Mr. Ashford, I can't guarantee I won't disappoint Lucas. I can't promise I'll handle everything perfectly. What I can promise is that I'll always be honest with him. And I won't leave without warning. That's all anyone can promise, Adrian said softly. And it's more than Lucas has had in a long time. Their eyes held for a moment too long, and Charlotte felt the air between them shift into something charged with possibility. Then Adrian cleared his throat, breaking the spell. You should get Emma home, he said, his tone returning to professional distance. It's getting late. As Charlotte gathered Emma and their belongings, preparing for the subway ride back to Brooklyn, Lucas appeared with a wrapped package. What's this? Charlotte asked. A present, Lucas said, suddenly shy. For Emma, for letting me show her my games. Emma opened it carefully to reveal a beautifully illustrated book about dragons and brave children. Lucas, this is too much, Charlotte protested, but Emma was already clutching the book like treasure. Thank you, Lucas, Emma said solemnly. I'll read it every night. Lucas's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes for the first time Charlotte had seen. On the subway ride home, Emma fell asleep against Charlotte's shoulder, the dragon book carefully protected in her lap. Charlotte stared at the darkness beyond the windows, thinking about Adrian's offer of the staff apartment, about the way he'd opened up to her, about the complicated grief that shaped the Ashford household. She was falling into something. She could feel it, a situation that was both professionally promising and personally dangerous. By the time they reached their building, Charlotte had made a decision. She'd accept the apartment, not for herself, but for Emma. Her daughter deserved stability, safety, opportunity. And if that meant Charlotte had to navigate the complicated feelings growing between her and Adrian Ashford, she'd find a way to manage it. She'd survived worse. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Charlotte and Emma moved into the staff apartment on a cold Saturday in early December, their meager belongings looking lost in the spacious 2-bedroom unit. Emma had her own room for the first time in her life, with actual closet space and windows that overlooked the city rather than a brick wall. She'd spun in circles when she first saw it, laughing with pure joy. Lucas had helped them move in, or more accurately, had directed the professional movers Adrian had hired despite Charlotte's protests. He'd appointed himself Emma's guide to the building, showing her the gym, the library, the rooftop garden that would be beautiful in spring. The two children had become inseparable, Lucas emerging from his shell in ways that shocked everyone who knew him. Charlotte's days developed a routine. Wake Emma at 7, breakfast together, then walk Lucas to school with Emma in tow until Charlotte could arrange her transfer to Ashford Academy for January. Afternoons were homework, activities, the ordinary rhythms of childcare elevated by extraordinary circumstances. The job itself was manageable. Lucas was challenging, certainly. He had bad days where the grief overwhelmed him, and he lashed out at anyone nearby. But Charlotte had learned to read his moods, to know when to push and when to give space. Margaret had become an ally rather than an overseer, offering advice and support with surprising warmth. What Charlotte hadn't been prepared for was the growing connection with Adrian. He worked long hours, often traveling for business, but when he was home, he sought out Charlotte's company in ways that felt increasingly personal. Conversations in the kitchen while she prepared dinner. Texts throughout the day asking her opinion on Lucas-related decisions. Quiet moments in the evening after the children were asleep, sharing wine and talking about everything except the tension building between them. 3 weeks after Charlotte started, Adrian invited her and Emma to join him and Lucas for a Sunday outing. Nothing formal, just ice skating at Rockefeller Center and dinner after. It's time Lucas did normal family activities again, Adrian had explained. And he's made it clear he wants Emma there. Charlotte knew she should refuse, should maintain professional boundaries, but Emma's excitement made it impossible. They spent a perfect winter afternoon skating, Emma wobbling on rental skates while Lucas patiently showed her the basics. Adrian stayed close to Charlotte, ostensibly to help her since she hadn't skated in years, but his hand on her waist felt far more intimate than necessary. At dinner, in a cozy Italian restaurant where the owner greeted Adrian like family, they sat in a corner booth and talked for hours. Lucas told awful jokes that made Emma giggle. Adrian shared stories about disastrous business meetings that had Charlotte laughing until her sides hurt. It felt easy, natural, like they were actually a family rather than employer and employee with their children along for supervision. That night, after Emma was asleep and Charlotte was preparing to leave the penthouse for her own apartment floors below, Adrian caught her at the door. "Charlotte," he said, and something in his voice made her turn. "I need to tell you something." "Okay," she said warily. "These past few weeks, working with you, seeing Lucas come back to life, spending time with you and Emma," Adrian paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I haven't felt this way in years. This hopeful, this alive. I know it's complicated. I'm your employer, and there are power dynamics and professional ethics to consider. But I can't stop thinking about you, and I needed you to know that." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. The honest admission hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. "Mr. Ashford," she began. "Adrian," he interrupted. "When it's just us, please call me Adrian." "Adrian," she tried again. "I feel it too, whatever this is. But you're right about the complications. If we cross this line, everything changes. If it doesn't work out, I lose my job, my apartment, the stability Emma finally has. The risk is enormous. I know. Adrian stepped closer. Which is why I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I just needed you to know that what I'm feeling isn't one-sided, and if the time comes when the risk feels manageable, when we've figured out how to protect you and Emma regardless of what happens between us, I'd very much like to explore this. Charlotte looked up at him, at the vulnerability in his expression, at the careful distance he was maintaining despite the confession. This man who could have anything he wanted was giving her space, time, protection. It was both frustrating and deeply attractive. The time will come, she said quietly. Just not yet. Adrian nodded, accepting her boundary with obvious reluctance. Then I'll wait. After she left, Charlotte leaned against her apartment door, her heart racing. She was falling for Adrian Ashford, and despite every rational reason to protect herself, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The next morning, everything changed. Charlotte arrived at the penthouse at 7:30 to find chaos. Margaret was on the phone, her voice tight with stress. Adrian was pacing near the windows, fully dressed for work but clearly not going anywhere. And Lucas was nowhere to be seen. What happened? Charlotte asked. Lucas is missing, Adrian said without preamble. He was supposed to be in his room sleeping, but when I checked on him at 7, he was gone. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Have you called the police? We've called building security, Margaret said, hanging up her phone. They're reviewing camera footage now, but Mr. Ashford wanted to wait before involving police in case Lucas is just hiding somewhere in the building. Why would he run away? Charlotte demanded. Everything's been going so well. Adrian's expression was devastated because yesterday, while you were shopping with Emma, Lucas overheard me on the phone with my lawyer. We were discussing custody arrangements in my will, updating it to name a guardian in case something happens to me. He heard me say that I'd chosen my sister Catherine since she has experience with children and Lucas knows her well. And he thought? Charlotte prompted, dreading the answer. He thought I was planning to send him away. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt warring on his face. When I went to explain after the call, he was already shut down. Told me he understood, that he'd always known I'd eventually get rid of him like I got rid of the nannies. I tried to explain that wasn't what I meant, that planning for emergencies doesn't mean I want him gone. But he wouldn't listen. Where would he go? Charlotte asked, her mind racing through possibilities. Margaret shook her head. Security footage shows him leaving through the service entrance at 6:45 this morning. He's been gone almost an hour. Charlotte pulled out her phone, opening the location app. Relief flooded through her. I know where he is. How? Adrian demanded. Emma shares her location with Lucas on her tablet. They use it for a game they play. She showed him her screen, where a small blue dot indicated Lucas's location. He's at the Central Park playground near 72nd Street. The one with the castle structure. We took them there last week. Adrian was already moving toward the door. I'll get him. Charlotte grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. That's not necessary. Yes, it is, Charlotte interrupted. He ran away because he thinks the adults in his life are making decisions without him. If we're going to bring him back, he needs to know we're on his side. Together, they found Lucas exactly where the app indicated, sitting inside the castle structure's highest tower, his knees drawn to his chest against the December cold. He saw them approaching and his expression closed off immediately. I'm not going back. Lucas, Adrian began, but Charlotte touched his arm, silently asking him to let her try first. Hey, Lucas, she called up. Mind if I come up there? It looks like you've got a good hiding spot. Go away, Lucas said, but there was more exhaustion than anger in his voice. Can't do that, Charlotte replied, starting to climb. Your dad's terrified. Margaret's called in security forces, and Emma's going to be very upset when she wakes up and finds out her best friend ran away without telling her. As Charlotte settled beside Lucas in the cramped tower space, Adrian remained at the base, giving them privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. "You heard your dad on the phone yesterday," Charlotte said gently. It wasn't a question. Lucas nodded miserably. "He's going to send me to Aunt Catherine's." "He said so." "Did he say that?" Charlotte asked. "Or did he say that if something happened to him, your Aunt Catherine would take care of you?" "What's the difference?" Lucas demanded. "He's planning to get rid of me either way." "The difference is everything," Charlotte said firmly. "Your dad isn't planning to send you away. He's planning for the worst-case scenario because that's what responsible parents do. My mom died, Lucas. Dad knows bad things happen. So he's making sure I have somewhere to go when he decides he doesn't want me anymore. Lucas, look at me." Charlotte waited until his tear-filled eyes met hers. "Your dad adores you. Everything he does, every decision he makes, is about trying to be the father you need. Updating his will wasn't about getting rid of you. It was about making sure that if anything ever happened to him, which it won't, but if it did, you'd be taken care of by someone you know and trust. He could just want me himself," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "If he really loved me, he wouldn't plan to send me away." "Oh, sweetheart." Charlotte pulled Lucas into a hug, feeling him resist before finally crumpling against her. "Love is exactly why he's planning. Because imagining a world where you're not protected is too terrifying for him to leave to chance." They sat like that for several minutes, Lucas crying silently into Charlotte's shoulder while she held him. Finally, when his tears subsided, she spoke again. "You know what Emma's biggest fear is? That I'll disappear like her dad did. So every night before bed we talk about my plans for the next day. Where I'll be, when I'll be home, what I'm doing to stay safe. Not because I'm planning to leave her, but because knowing the plans helps her feel secure. Maybe you and your dad need to do something similar." Lucas pulled back, wiping his eyes. "You really think he wants to keep me?" "I know he does," Charlotte said, "but I think maybe you two need to talk more. About the scary stuff. The what-ifs. All the things you're both afraid to say out loud because saying them feels too real." "Are you going to make me go back?" Lucas asked. "Nope." Charlotte stood, offering her hand. "I'm going to invite you to come back. And I'm going to promise that when we get there, you and your dad are going to have a real conversation. Not him talking at you. Not you shutting down. But both of you being honest about what scares you. Deal?" Lucas considered, then took her hand. "Deal." At the base of the castle, Adrian looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. When Lucas climbed down, Adrian dropped to his knees, pulling his son into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I should have talked to you, should have explained what I was doing and why. I never meant to make you feel unwanted." "I'm sorry too," Lucas mumbled against his father's shoulder. "I shouldn't have run away." "Yes, you should have," Charlotte interrupted, and both Ashfords looked at her with surprise. "Not the method I'd recommend, but expressing that you're scared and angry instead of just shutting down. That's progress, Lucas." The three of them walked back to the Ashford Tower together, Lucas between Charlotte and Adrian, the morning sun just beginning to warm the cold December air. In the penthouse, Margaret had prepared hot chocolate and breakfast, her relief at Lucas's safe return evident in her misty eyes. After Lucas was settled with food and a warm blanket, Adrian pulled Charlotte aside. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate," he said quietly. "You found him. You brought him back. You did the hard part." "I just knew where to look," Charlotte deflected. Adrian shook his head. "You did much more than that. You understood what Lucas needed in that moment, and you gave it to him. You're remarkable, Charlotte." The intensity in his gaze made Charlotte's breath catch. She was acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the emotion radiating from him in waves. "Adrian," she began, but he stepped back, visibly collecting himself. "I'm sorry, this isn't the time or place." "But Charlotte, what I said last night? That hasn't changed. If anything, this morning proved how much I need you in our lives. How much Lucas needs you. We need to talk," Charlotte said. "Really talk about what this is becoming and how we navigate it without putting Emma and Lucas at risk." "Tonight?" Adrian suggested. "After the children are asleep?" Charlotte nodded, her heart already racing at what that conversation might bring. "Tonight," she agreed, having no idea that before night fell, a ghost from her past would return to shatter the fragile new life she'd built.